Welcome to another deep dive. And today I am talking directly to you.
Yes, you. We know exactly what you're up to.
Right. You are currently in the trenches. You are studying for a massive professional planning exam, and you've probably got highlighters running completely dry.
A towering stack of index cards.
Exactly. And just a whole lot of really dense theory swimming around in your head. So today we are making our mission all about you.
We've custom-tailored this deep dive to act as your ultimate study guide. Strictly business, but, we're going to make it fascinating.
We're going to help you conquer what is honestly one of the most notoriously complex, slippery, and frankly frustrating concepts in the entire field of planning theory.
It really is the ultimate planning buzzword, isn't it? The phrase, the public interest.
Oh, absolutely.
Because every planner uses it, every local zoning board evokes it, and, every private developer claims they're serving it.
Yeah, but if an exam prompt asks you to actually define it on paper,
things get incredibly murky, which is exactly why we are analyzing this specific source material today. Right.
It's a highly detailed, systematic review article that attempts to finally pin down what public interest actually means, taking all the guesswork out of your exam prep.
Okay, let's unpack this, because this source, it isn't just an opinion piece from a single theorist. The authors of this study did something massive.
They really did.
They rigorously analyzed decades of literature, specifically spanning from 1940 all the way to 2020.
To categorize exactly how this term has been used and defined over 80 years of city building.
80 years! That's a lot of zoning meetings.
Precisely. And for a professional exam, it's not enough to just memorize the final definitions. You need to understand the methodology behind the research.
Because in the academic and professional spheres, the validity of a study's findings rests entirely on how rigorously the researchers gathered their data.
Exactly. If you can confidently explain the methodology in an essay question, you demonstrate a foundational understanding of the research itself.
Which examiners absolutely love. Oh, they eat it up. So our mission today is to walk you through that methodology, break down the 4 primary categories of definitions they discovered, and arm you with 4 fundamental questions every planner must ask.
Let's start right there at the foundation, the search methodology. As a planner, you know better than anyone that the process matters just as much as the final plan.
And the process these researchers used was essentially a massive filtration system.
Right. They started by casting an incredibly wide net. They went into major academic databases like Scopus and Google Scholar.
And their inclusion criteria were mercilessly strict. To even be considered for this study, the keywords had to appear specifically in the titles or the abstracts of the articles.
Just the titles or abstracts.
Right. Furthermore, the documents had to be exclusively in English and published within that 80-year window between 1940 and 2020.
Now, I could sit here and read you the exact number of articles they found at every single stage of their database queries, but let's focus on the actual impact of this funnel. Because they started out with over 4,000 raw results.
4,000?
4,000. I mean, they used search terms ranging from public interest and common good to community interest and local public good.
Just imagine being the researcher staring down the barrel of 4,000 peer-reviewed papers.
I'd need a lot of coffee.
But this is where the rigorous weeding out happens. They filtered first by reading titles, which discarded thousands right off the bat.
Then they read the abstracts of the survivors.
Yep. Finally, they read the full texts of the remaining batch. They even hand-selected a few foundational texts just to ensure they didn't miss anything crucial that the database algorithm might have skipped.
And that massive 1,000-strong pile was eventually whittled down to a highly concentrated core of just 145 carefully selected articles.
That is the number you want to remember for the exam. Over 4,000 down to 145.
But to make that final cut, the article had to meet one ultimate non-negotiable criteria, right?
Exactly. To be included in the final content analysis, the article had to provide a definition of the concept of public interest.
Either explicitly or implicitly.
Right, and before we get into the actual categories, we really need to establish those 2 terms, explicit and implicit. The researchers use these constantly to classify the definitions.
We'll be using these a lot today, so let's get them straight. An explicit definition means the author literally wrote it out, like the public interest is X.
Clear as day.
Yeah.
Whereas an implicit definition means the author defined it indirectly.
So they might have just examined the dimensions of a planning program, and the researchers had to deduce, based on how they operate, they are implicitly treating the public interest as Y.
That distinction is going to be a lifesaver on the exam. So you're not just citing a textbook. You're leveraging 80 years of peer-reviewed planning theory distilled into 145 core texts.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting.
Let's hear it.
The researchers took those 145 articles and built a massive taxonomy. They discovered that every time a planner or a theorist talks about the public interest, they are almost always operating within one of four main frameworks.
Let's break those down. And you might want to grab your pen because we're going to drop some heavy-hitting theorist names you'll definitely want to reference.
The first major framework is Category 1, definition based on planning ethics.
This splits into two totally different ethical camps. The first camp is deontological, or duty-based ethics. The researchers note that when articles use this approach, it's almost always an implicit definition.
Deontological is a big word, but really it just means focusing on the moral obligation of the planner.
Right.
Think of it like a doctor's Hippocratic oath, but for city planning. In this view, the public interest isn't a math problem you solve. It is the primary moral commitment of planners to society, formulated through continuous and open debate.
That's a great way to think about it. If you see an exam question focusing on a planner's inherent moral duty to facilitate societal debate, regardless of the outcome, you're looking at the deontological approach.
And the key theorists to associate with this.
You're looking at Howe and Kaufman from their work in 1979 and John Rawls from 1971.
Now, on the flip side of the ethics category, we have the teleological or results-based approach. The researchers classify this as an explicit definition.
This is your classic utilitarian view.
The text defines it literally as public interest is the greatest happiness of the greatest number.
Yes, the classic utilitarian equation. It's entirely focused on the outcome.
So does bulldozing this historic neighborhood to build a new transit hub benefit 80% of the city's commuters, even if it displaces 20% of the local residents?
If yes, it serves the public interest under a teleological framework. The end justifies the means.
For the exam, link this to foundational theorists like Bentham and Mill. And in the specific planning sphere, Meyerson and Banfield from 1955.
Exactly. So if the first category is entirely about the planner's internal ethical compass, what happens when we look outward at the actual meat of the plan itself?
That brings us to Category 2, definition based on normative planning substance. This is about the actual content and justification of what planners do.
Right, and the first subcategory here is the criterion for justification, which is an explicit definition.
So this approach views the public interest as the main purpose of planning, based on global and legal values.
It equates the public interest to a measurable increase in well-being in the specific area under planning.
Basically checking the boxes. Does the substance of this plan meet legal standards? Does it objectively improve well-being?
If yes, that plan is the public interest. Think of theorists like Altshuler from 1965 and Klosterman from 1980 when you see this justification-based approach.
But the second part of Category 2 is where it gets a little more chaotic.
It really does.
It's called pluralistic aggregation, which is also an explicit definition.
I love this one because it admits that city planning is incredibly messy. It defines the public interest as the aggregation of multiple and even contradictory values.
And ultimately, those aggregated, messy values reflect broad social values.
Yeah.
I always think of pluralistic aggregation like making a stew out of wildly mismatched leftover ingredients.
A stew.
Yeah, like you've got the developers' carrots, the environmentalists' potatoes, and the long-term residents' beef. They don't naturally go together. Their values are totally contradictory.
But the planner's job is to throw them all in a pot and mathematically or politically boil them down until it resembles a single meal.
That is a perfect explain it like I'm five analogy for your exam.
This definition says the public interest isn't one single magical harmonious solution. It's the raw aggregation of all those conflicting desires.
And again, Bentham and Mill pop up here, along with Altshuler, because there's a mathematical, utilitarian undertone to aggregating those values.
Okay, so we've got the planner's ethics and we've got the plan's substance. But what about the journey?
How do we actually arrive at the decision?
That is Category 3, definition based on the planning procedure. It's not about what the decision is, but how we get there.
The first subcategory here is neutral, which the study identifies as an implicit definition.
A neutral procedural definition argues that the public interest is simply the result of an open and democratic dialogue process.
And here is the kicker. It assumes this happens without the need for planner intervention.
The planner just sets the table, the public talks, and whatever comes out of that fair democratic process is the public interest.
Wait, let me play devil's advocate here. If the planner doesn't intervene at all, doesn't that just mean the loudest, wealthiest, or most organized voices in the room win the day?
That is the exact critique of this approach.
How is that the public interest?
It's a huge problem. And it's why the definitive theorist for this communicative rationality, Jürgen Habermas, alongside Rawls, relies heavily on the concept of an ideal speech situation.
Meaning,
It requires a perfectly level playing field where power dynamics are completely stripped away.
whether that actually exists in a Tuesday night zoning board meeting is a whole different debate.
Very true. But theoretically, the flawless democratic process itself guarantees the public interest.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Now, contrast that with the next procedural subcategory, the consensus-based procedure, which is another implicit definition.
This defines the public interest as the consensus of the various interests achieved through a communication process.
Notice the shift there. The neutral approach just relies on the democratic machinery running on its own.
But the consensus approach requires a specific destination, an agreement.
The planner is heavily involved here as a mediator, facilitating dialogue until everyone nods their heads.
For your exam, the towering figures here are Healy, Ines, and Forrester. If the prompt mentions collaborative planning or consensus building, you are firmly in this procedural category.
But what if people just refuse to agree? I mean, that happens all the time.
That brings us to the final procedural subcategory, conflict management-based procedure, also implicit.
This is the pragmatic sibling of consensus.
It acknowledges that people might never hold hands and sing Kumbaya, but through communication, a compromise or a balancing of interests can be forged.
And that hard-won compromise becomes the working definition of the public interest.
Exactly.
Hold on, how is conflict management different from the pluralistic aggregation stew we made earlier?
That is a brilliant question. Pluralistic aggregation is about substance. It's almost mathematical.
So we take 30% of what the developer wants and 70% of what the neighborhood wants and aggregate it into a plan.
Right. Conflict management, on the other hand, is about the procedure. It's about the act of getting those angry parties into a room and managing their communication until they hammer out a compromise themselves.
One focuses on the ingredients, the other focuses on the cooking technique.
Okay, that clarifies it perfectly. Let's zoom way out for category 4. Definition based on political discourse governing planning.
Now, a very quick disclaimer for you listening. As a professional taking an exam, you need to understand these frameworks objectively.
The exam isn't asking for your personal political stance. It's testing your ability to recognize these academic classifications from the researcher's text.
We are not endorsing any of these viewpoints. We are just reporting impartially on how they are defined in the literature. So let's keep it strictly analytical.
It's exactly right. So the researchers identified 3 main macro-level political discourses. The first is welfarist, which is an explicit definition.
Under a welfarist discourse, the public interest is viewed as the unitary interest of the people as a whole, which is determined by political and social elites.
It's very top-down.
Next is liberal democracy, marked as an implicit definition. Here, the public interest is defined as the liberal government's commitment to a process that pursues social progress by maximizing individual choices.
So while the welfarist approach assumes a single unitary good decided by experts at the top, the liberal democracy approach focuses on creating a system where individuals have the maximum freedom to choose what's best for themselves.
And the third political discourse is neoliberalism, an explicit definition. In this framework, the public interest is strictly the balance of competing interests achieved through bargaining.
The key word there is bargaining. It views the city essentially as a giant marketplace.
You have competing interests, and the public interest isn't some high-minded moral absolute. It's simply whatever equilibrium is reached when those interests negotiate, trade, and bargain with one another.
So what does this all mean? How do you actually use this alphabet soup of theory on test day?
That leads us perfectly into Section 3.
What's fascinating here is how the authors took decades of dense theory from those 145 articles and condensed it into 4 distinct, highly practical questions.
This is your mental scaffolding. If you get a terrifyingly vague essay prompt, you just run the scenario through these 4 questions.
Let's do exactly that. We'll take turns. Question number 1. What is the nature of the public interest?
When you read the exam prompt, ask yourself about the nature of the concept being presented. Is the public interest a unitary concept, meaning the author thinks there is only one true public interest?
Or is it a plural concept, recognizing multiple different publics with different needs?
Is it a subjective concept based on feelings and values, or an objective one based on measurable data?
Is it based on morals or consequences. Pinning down the nature is step one.
Question number 2. Who defines the public interest?
This is all about power and authority. In the scenario you are analyzing, do state or official planners define the public interest? Do the citizens define it?
Do special interest groups define it? Or do elites define it?
Locating the definer immediately tells you which theoretical category you are operating within.
Question number 3. By what process is the public interest defined?
We covered this heavily in the procedural category. Ask yourself, does a democratic and neutral process define the public interest in this scenario?
Does a consensus-based process define it? Does a conflict management process define it?
Or does a rational top-down decision-making process define it? Identifying the process is often the easiest way to unlock a multiple-choice question on planning theory.
And finally, question number 4. What is the use of public interest? Why are we even defining it in the first place?
Is the concept being used practically for public decision-making? Is it defined simply for identifying a new plan's goals?
Is the term being thrown around defensively just to legitimize planning decisions that have already been made behind closed doors?
Is it for organizing the planning procedure, or is it for evaluating the final plan after the concrete is already poured?
I love that framework. Nature, definer, process, use. Let's do a lightning round test.
Let's do it.
Imagine an exam prompt describes a city council that quietly approves a massive waterfront casino because their internal data shows it will maximize tax revenue.
Okay.
And then they announce to the press that it's in the public interest. Run the questions.
Easy. Nature. It's objective and consequentialist. It's based on tax data and outcomes.
Definer.
The elites and state planners.
The process.
Rational decision-making behind closed doors. Definitely not consensus.
And use.
Legitimizing a decision they already made. By breaking it down like that, you just wrote a flawless, theoretically sound essay outline in 30 seconds.
It is basically a cheat code. Let's do a quick recap of the journey we just took.
Good idea.
We started by looking at the rigorous methodology, how researchers started with a massive net of over 4,000 articles. They filtered them strictly by English language, title, and abstract.
And distilled them down to 145 core texts from 1940 to 2020 that explicitly or implicitly defined our topic.
From there, we explored the 4 core categories. Definitions based on planning ethics. That's your deontological duties versus teleological outcomes.
Normative planning substance, justifying the plan versus boiling that pluralistic stew.
Planning procedure, neutral arenas, consensus building, and conflict management.
And finally, political discourse. Welfarist, liberal democracy, and neoliberal marketplaces.
And we wrapped it up with the 4 fundamental questions every planner needs in their toolkit. What is its nature? Who defines it? By what process? And for what use?
You are going to absolutely crush this exam.
You really are. You now have a deep, highly structured understanding of a concept that trips up seasoned professionals every single day.
You know the methodology, you know the metaphors, and you know the theorists.
But before we let you get back to your flashcards, I want to leave you with one final thought to ponder during your study breaks.
We've looked at 80 years of history, from 1940 to 2020. But imagine the city of 2040.
Right now, algorithmic modeling and artificial intelligence are beginning to predict urban traffic flows, housing shortages, and zoning impacts with terrifying accuracy.
And at the same time, climate change is going to force mandatory managed retreats from coastlines, regardless of what the community wants.
Oh, that is a wild thought.
Right. In a world governed by predictive algorithms and existential climate mandates, who defines the public interest then?
Does the AI define it?
Does pure survival define it? We might just be looking at the imminent birth of a 5th category of planning theory. Something to think about.
That will definitely change how you look at the future of this profession. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Now get back to studying, and we'll see you next time.